Hey guys, welcome to Get Awesome Gaming. Thanks for taking the time to check out this video. This is the maiden voyage of this channel, so if you're hearing this, congratulations. You're in on the ground floor of this train wreck. So without further ado, this is my review for Remnant from the Ashes. Developer Gunfire Games was saying before Remnant released that the game was essentially Dark Souls with guns. At the time, I kind of rolled my eyes at the comparison because so many developers don't seem to get what makes Dark Souls Dark Souls. They think it all boils down to get good and neglect to acknowledge the effort that goes into things like enemy design, world building, balancing a litany of weapons with all different animations in a game that has PvP in it. Gunfire Games did borrow more than just the difficulty from the Souls games though, as here you have a hub world, Ward 13, which serves much as it would in the Souls games. Dodges have iframes rewarding you for waiting till the very last second to avoid incoming attacks. So there is more here than just action RPG and prepare to die. Most of the time, this style of game ends up being something inspired by, but less than the game being referenced. Here, however, I almost wish they would have just let the game stand on its own merits when describing it, because even though it's borrowed a lot of elements from Dark Souls, it's fantastic to play and different enough at its core to be considered at least something tangentially unique. The shooting and gameplay are really tight, so the combat of the game flows smoothly, but is intense at the same time as the developers really held true to the challenge they promised. You will die a lot playing this game, but unlike the Souls series, there is no penalty to death, which is nice given the action feels much more fast-paced than your traditional Souls game. I will say in this type of game I preferred the lack of death penalty because I experimented with different weapons more than I did in an average Souls playthrough, as I was less worried about losing resources. The game does contain melee weapons, which you use automatically when hitting the trigger while not aiming down sights. That said, the melee weapons don't come into play that often, as many of the enemies that don't do range damage are designed to close distance on the player, so you often don't have the spacing necessary for melee-focused combat. Remnant takes place in a post-apocalyptic future. Not the most original of settings, but here the source of Earth's downfall comes from a Stargate-style invasion from a species known as the Root. They are a varied enemy type even though they all kind of have that possessed tree feel to them. The game starts you off fighting them on Earth and eventually leads to your character traveling to other worlds in search of a way to defeat the Root on Earth. The story isn't going to win any Pulitzer Prizes, but I did feel it did a good enough job at keeping the narrative interesting to push the game forward. At the same time, the traveling to other worlds mechanic allowed for a completely new set of enemies without need for introduction or narrative motivation. While the post-apocalyptic setting isn't original, I usually judge these games by how the story depicts the fall of Earth. If you've played Horizon Zero Dawn, that would be an example of explaining that well. Here I felt the alien invasion was at least one of the lesser used catastrophes as opposed to a virus or nuclear war. The progression is handled in a few ways. As you get experience, you earn trait points that can be spent on traits that you unlock from beating certain bosses or playing in co-op. These traits range from your traditional more health to elemental resistance to increased critical damage. Basically, all your common RPG stats are handled in this manner. The other resource you earn as you go through the game are mods. These mods can be applied to a slot in your weapons and have varied effects, from spawning turrets to creating decoys. These are all useful abilities that help customize how your character plays. One of the more intriguing aspects of the game is that it rolls a different version of the world for each player, so no two players' playthroughs should be exactly the same. Not only can you get different bosses, but different zones as well. Playing co-op, I was able to gain weapons and mods that I was never able to get in my version of the game unless I re-rolled my world. This adds a lot of replayability, as one trip through the game won't reward your character with all the possible tools in the game. I have, however, noticed in some other videos this game being referred to as a looter shooter. I just want to be clear, I did not feel this was a looter shooter. Enemies drop ammo, scrap, which is the in-game currency, and upgrade materials. The only time you acquire new gear, it's either found in the level, comes from a boss drop, or occasionally from a merchant. In that regard, the game reward system is structured much more like Dark Souls than it would be your traditional looter shooter. I was pleasantly surprised by this game. I went into it halfway expecting a very derivative and throwaway experience. What I got was a crisp game with a fresh twist on a genre I had assumed wouldn't lend itself to this style of game. Well, that's it for this review. If you made it this far, I really appreciate you taking the time to check this out. If you found this review helpful or just feel so inclined, please hit that like button, as it helps out a ton. I also want to know if you are currently enjoying the game or planning on picking it up yourself in the comments. If you really wanted to help a new content creator out, a share on social media would be amazing. Either way, time is a valuable commodity, and I appreciate whatever help you feel so inclined to give. I plan on doing more of these reviews. Right now I'm targeting Monster Hunter World Iceborne expansion and The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening remake as my next two projects. So if those reviews interest you, please consider subscribing. Well, that's it for me, guys. I'll catch you next time. In the meantime, be awesome to each other.